In fire and ruin, the weapon fulfilled its purpose, not in victory alone,
June
but in survival.
1941.
In the quiet of
A British
wartime
infantry
laboratory,
company near
innovation
Sollum,
was born.
Egypt,
A
watches
new
6
weapon,
German Panzer
forged
III
not from
tanks
rage,
roll toward their
but from
position.
necessity.
The lieutenant
first
orders
test
his
droid.
anti-tank rifle
Crude,
team forward.
unstable, but
2
promising.
men lugging a 55-pound
hope
boy's
amid the
rifle
frozen
that could
fields of
supposedly
war.
punch
In
through
dimly
armor.
lit rooms,
They set up
decisions
aim at the
were
lead
made that
tank's
would shape
hull
the
at
battles
200
to come.
yards and fire.
The weapon
The
was
half-inch
approved for
tungsten
combat.
round hits
On
dead
the front
center.
lines, the new
It leaves a
weapon proved its
fist-sized
worth.
dent
Now,
and ricochets into the
turning
sand.
fear into
The Panzer
firepower.
doesn't even slow down. 4 minutes later, that entire company
Reports
is
from
either
the front
dead
spoke
or
of
running.
victory, and
This
of the
wasn't an
heavy cost
isolated
that came
incident.
with it.
This was the standard
Across enemy
experience for
lines,
Allied
eyes
infantrymen
watched
facing
closely
German
from
armor.
others,
And within
studying,
2 years,
adapting,
one
preparing
Swiss-born
to strike
civilian
back.
engineer
Years
would
later,
change
it stood
everything with an
silent
idea so
a
simple
relic
that
of
military
ingenuity and
experts called it
destruction, a
reckless,
reminder of what
dangerous,
war demands
and
from
impossible.
In fire
His
and
modification
ruin,
would
the weapon
transform a
fulfilled
weapon
its
that missed
purpose,
4 out of 10 shots
not in
into
victory
one that
alone,
never missed.
but in
A
survival.
weapon that barely scratched tank armor into one that punched through 8 inches of hardened steel. His name was Henry Mohaupt, and this is the story of how rifling a rocket tube saved thousands of Allied lives and changed infantry warfare forever. From 1939 through early 1942, German armor engineering had leapfrogged everything the Allies could carry into battle. The Panzer III came with 50 mm of front armor. The Panzer IV had 80 mm. The Tiger Y tanks, which started appearing in late 1942, rolled into combat with 100 mm of hardened steel protecting their crews. Allied foot soldiers had effectively nothing that could stop them. The boy's anti-tank rifle. Britain's main answer to armored vehicles could penetrate 21 mm of armor at 100 yards under perfect conditions. Perfect conditions meant flat angle, no sloping, the right type of steel. Combat conditions were never perfect. The rifle weighed as much as 2 men's full kit, kicked hard enough to break collarbones, and required 2 soldiers to operate. Most importantly, it couldn't reliably stop anything heavier than a light armored car. By 1941, the Americans had it worse. When the U.S. Army entered the war, their anti-tank rifle was the .50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun. Against a moving Panzer IV, it was about as effective as throwing rocks. Some infantry units carried sticky bombs devices you were supposed to run up and attach to a tank by hand. The survival rate for soldiers attempting this maneuver was roughly what you'd expect for someone sprinting toward a 30-ton machine gun platform. The British tried the Piat projector infantry anti-tank, which launched a 2-pound bomb using a massive spring. It had an effective range of about 100 yards, required 40 pounds of force to cock, and frequently failed to penetrate even when it hit. One British sergeant in North Africa described it as a drainpipe loaded with hope. The French had various grenade launchers. The Soviets used anti-tank grenades that required soldiers to close within throwing distance 20 to 30 yards from machines bristling with machine guns. Here's what made this situation genuinely terrifying for Allied commanders. German tactical philosophy by 1941 centered on combined arms warfare. Tanks supported by infantry and artillery, all moving together. When a Panzer division attacked your position, you couldn't just hide and wait for your own tanks to show up. Your own tanks were probably burning 3 miles back. You needed something a 19-year-old infantryman could carry, aim, and fire before that Panzer's machine gunner cut him in half. Something that would actually penetrate the armor and stop the tank. By late 1941, after watching entire divisions crumble under German armored assaults in France, North Africa, and the Soviet Union, Allied war departments were receiving the same desperate message from every theater. Give us something portable that kills tanks or we're going to lose this war. One shattered infantry company at a time. The casualty reports made the math brutally clear. During the Battle of France in 1940, German armor shredded Allied defensive lines specifically because foot soldiers had no effective answer to tanks. The problem wasn't tactics or courage. The problem was physics. Infantrymen were bringing 20 mm penetration capability to an 80 mm armor fight. By early 1942, U.S. Army ordnance faced a nightmare scenario. Fix this problem fast, or start explaining to families why their sons died helpless against machines they couldn't scratch. But moi thu sap thay đổi, vì một người đàn ông mà không ai trong căn phòng họp Pentagon để ý đến. Henry Mohaupt was born in Switzerland in 1890, trained as a mechanical engineer in Zurich, and spent 2 decades working on industrial explosives before the war. He wasn't military. He'd never served in any army. He was a civilian consultant, the kind of specialist armies hired when they needed someone who understood shaped charge physics better than their own ordnance officers. Mohaupt had helped develop the fundamental principles behind shaped charge warheads, the technology that would make portable anti-tank weapons possible. A shaped charge uses a copper cone and high explosive to create a superheated jet of metal plasma that cuts through armor like a blowtorch through butter. The physics are elegant. The military application was revolutionary. But in early 1942, the U.S. Army had a weapon that used Mohaupt's shaped charge technology, and it was failing spectacularly. The M1 rocket launcher, quickly nicknamed the Bazooka, after a musical instrument, was supposed to be America's answer to German armor. Captain Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Ewell had developed it in May 1942 at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. A steel tube open at both ends launched a rocket-propelled grenade with a shaped charge warhead. The rocket motor's exhaust vented backward through the tube while the projectile flew forward. The operator shouldered the tube, aimed, fired, and theoretically stayed alive. The weapon weighed 13 pounds, could be carried by one soldier, and delivered a 3.5-pound warhead that should penetrate over 4 inches of armor plate. Should penetrate. Theoretically. In practice, the M1 Bazooka was a disaster. Field tests in late 1942 at Fort Benning showed hit rates around 38% at 75 yards. Against moving targets, accuracy dropped below 20%. The problem wasn't the shaped charge warhead. The problem wasn't the rocket motor. The problem was that smooth-bore launch tube. Without anything to stabilize the rocket's flight, tiny variations in motor thrust or wind conditions sent the projectile spinning randomly through the air. Sometimes it flew straight. Sometimes it tumbled end over end. Sometimes it corkscrewed like a drunk pigeon. Even when rockets hit the target, they often struck at odd angles, which meant the shaped charge jet didn't form perpendicular to the armor surface. Penetration dropped by 30% or more. Officers watching these tests did grim mathematics. If your bazooka team only hits 1 shot in 5, and you only get 1 shot before that tank's machine gunner kills you, you're not stopping tanks. You're volunteering for suicide missions. By December 1942, Army Ordnance faced a choice. Scrap the bazooka program entirely, or fix the accuracy problem before thousands of these useless tubes shipped to soldiers who would trust their lives to them. Và rồi một đêm định mệnh tại Aberdeen Proving Ground, Henry Mohaupt đưa ra ý tưởng mà tất cả mọi người cho là Dean Row. January 1940. The proposal landed on Colonel William Crozier's desk at Aberdeen Proving Ground like a grenade without a pin. Mohaupt had spent 3 weeks analyzing the bazooka's accuracy failures and concluded the Army was approaching the problem backward. Instead of trying to perfect the rocket motor or adjust the warhead weight, he suggested they rifle the launch tube. Cut spiral grooves inside the smooth bore, just like a traditional firearm. Force the rocket to spin as it launched. Use gyroscopic stability to keep it flying nose first toward the target. Crozier's response, according to meeting minutes, was immediate and emphatic. Absolutely not. His reasoning seemed sound to everyone in that conference room. Rifling works by forcing a bullet to spin as it travels down a barrel. The grooves cut into the barrel engage with the bullet's surface, imparting rotational velocity. This gyroscopic spin stabilizes the bullet's flight, which is why rifles are more accurate than smoothbore muskets. But the bazooka wasn't firing a bullet. It was firing a rocket with its own motor still burning as it flew. Crozier argued that forcing a rocket to spin while its motor created forward thrust would create unpredictable aerodynamic forces. The weapon might become even less accurate. Worse, the rocket could tumble and detonate prematurely, killing the operator. There was another concern that Crozier didn't say out loud, but everyone understood. The Army had already manufactured 14,000 M1 bazookas. These weapons were in production at 3 factories. Some were already crated for shipment to North Africa. If rifling proved necessary, every single tube would need to be either scrapped or recalled and remanufactured. The cost would run into millions of dollars. The delay would mean troops going into combat, possibly the upcoming Sicily invasion, without adequate anti-tank weapons. The institutional pressure to declare the existing design adequate was enormous. Mohaupt pushed back with data. He wasn't some academic theorist. He was the engineer who'd helped develop the shaped charge warhead that made bazookas possible in the first place. He brought calculations showing that the rocket motor's burn time, approximately 2 seconds, was actually an advantage. If the tube's rifling spun the rocket during that brief acceleration phase, the projectile would maintain stabilized flight for the remaining 2 to 3 seconds of flight time. The spin wouldn't fight the motor thrust. It would complement it, creating a gyroscopically stable projectile that stayed nose first throughout its trajectory. He also pointed out something embarrassing. The Germans were already doing this. Intelligence reports from captured Panzer launchers, Germany's reverse-engineered copy of captured American bazookas, showed the Germans had added rifling to their tubes. German accuracy was measurably better than the American original. The student had improved the teacher's design, and American soldiers were dying because of it. The meeting ended with Crozier denying the proposal. His written rejection cited insufficient testing data and unacceptable modification risk to approved ordnance. In military bureaucracy, language that meant we're not gambling on your theory when we have a working design, even if that design doesn't work very well. For most engineers, that rejection would have ended the story. Army ordnance had spoken. The bazooka would remain smooth bore. Soldiers would continue missing 4 out of 10 shots. But Mohaupt had one advantage that rigid military hierarchy didn't account for. He was a civilian. He didn't have to follow the chain of command. He knew Captain Skinner from earlier shaped charge development work. Skinner, despite being Army, had a reputation for pushing unconventional solutions. More importantly, Skinner had General Gladion Barnes's ear. Barnes was Chief of Research and Development for Army Ordnance, the man who could overrule Crozier if convinced. So Mohaupt did what frustrated engineers have done since engineering was invented. He went around the official channels. Within a week, Skinner had arranged for Mohaupt to brief Barnes directly bypassing 3 levels of command structure and about 50 regulations regarding proper proposal channels. General Barnes listened to 15 minutes of explanation about gyroscopic stability rocket motor physics and German intelligence reports. Then he made a decision that would reshape American anti-armor doctrine. Approve construction of 3 rifled prototypes for comparison testing. If Mohaupt's theory failed, the project dies. If it succeeds, full production modifications begin immediately regardless of cost. Crozier got overruled by his superior, which made the upcoming test deeply personal. The standard military response to being overruled is ensuring test conditions make success as difficult as possible. If rifling failed under rigorous testing, Crozier would be proven right. If it succeeded, he'd order the modifications and take credit for thorough verification. Either way, institutional protocol was satisfied. The test date was set for January 28, 1943. Aberdeen Proving Ground. Captured German Panzer IV armor plate. 20 shots with standard smooth-bore bazookas. 20 shots with Mohaupt's rifled prototypes. Everything measured, documented, witnessed by 15 officers and engineers who understood that careers would rise or fall based on what happened over the next 3 hours. Ho kombiet rang thu ngiem ne se ku hang ngin mang ngui, va te doi chin trang bo bing mai mai. January 28, 1943. Came in cold at Aberdeen Proving Ground. Temperature at Euro 600 hours was 18 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind gusts hitting 20 miles per hour off the Chesapeake Bay. the kind of cold that makes metal burn your hands and turns breath into fog. Not ideal conditions for testing experimental weapons, but the Sicily invasion was scheduled for summer. If these rifled bazookas were going to ship with assault forces testing, couldn't wait for better weather. The observation bunker held Colonel Crozier, General Barnes, Captain Skinner, Henry Mohaupt, and 11 other officers and specialists. A stenographer recorded everything. The atmosphere, according to Skinner's later account, was tense enough to snap. The test protocol was straightforward. 20 shots with standard M1 smooth-bore bazookas at 50 yards, followed by 20 shots with Mohaupt's rifled prototypes at the same range. 3 different operators for each weapon type to eliminate shooter skill bias. Targets would be measured after each 5-shot group. Hit rate, penetration depth, and shaped charge jet formation quality would all be documented. First up, the smooth-bore baseline. The operator, a sergeant from the Aberdeen Test Detachment, shouldered the standard M1 aimed at the first Panzer plate and fired. The rocket left the tube with the familiar whoosh, trailing white smoke. It hit the plate 2 feet left of center with a sharp crack. Engineers downrange examined the impact. Penetration depth measured 3.8 inches into the backing clay. Decent, but not enough to reach a Panzer's crew compartment through 80mm armor. Shot 2 achieved 4.1 inches. Shot 3 missed the plate entirely, sailing wide right. Exactly the accuracy problem that necessitated this entire test. Shot 4 managed 3.5 inches. Shot 5 reached 4.4 inches. The pattern emerging was brutal inconsistency. Even when rockets hit, penetration varied by nearly an inch based on impact angle and jet formation quality. By shot 15 of the smooth-bore group, the results painted a damning picture. 11 hits out of 15 attempts. Penetration ranging from 3.2 to 4.6 inches, averaging around 3.9 inches. 4 misses at 50 yards point-blank tank killing range. 1 rocket had tumbled so badly it hit the plate sideways and failed to detonate properly. These numbers matched field test data. They also confirmed what everyone already knew. The smooth-bore bazooka was marginally effective at best and catastrophically unreliable at worst. Nyung day, chi moi la khoi do. Kak ong fong ka ren swan sap cha thay kit kwa, ma không ai trong căn phòng quan sát tin được ngay cả Mohaupt. Mohaupt had fabricated 3 tubes with spiral grooves cut at a 1 in 16 twist rate. 1 complete rotation every 16 inches of tube length. The grooves were shallow, only 0.03 of an inch deep, just enough to grip the rocket body and impart spin without creating excessive friction. The first rifled shot left the tube with a different sound, a cleaner whoosh without the wobble. Dead center hit. Engineers downrange measured the penetration. 7.2 inches. The observation bunker went completely silent. Second shot. 7.4 inches. Third shot. 6.9 inches. Fourth shot. 7.1 inches. Fifth shot. 7.3 inches. Every rocket flying arrow straight. Every rocket hitting nose first. Every rocket penetrating nearly double the smooth-bore average. Colonel Crozier asked for the test to pause while engineers verified the measurement methodology. They remeasured every rifled impact using calibrated depth gauges. The numbers held. Testing resumed under intense scrutiny. Shot 15 with the rifled bazooka targeted the thickest test plate. 8 inches of rolled homogeneous armor equivalent to Tiger Wyglace's protection. The rocket struck dead center, detonated, and sent a spray of molten metal through the observation slit in the test bunker, 300 yards away. The downrange crew waited 30 seconds for the plate to cool enough to approach, then called back the measurement that changed everything. Complete penetration. The shaped charge jet had burned through all 8 inches and continued into the clay backing behind it. Penetration depth in clay measured 2.3 inches beyond the plate face. General Barnes stood up from his observation position. According to the official test report filed later that day, he said 5 words: "Run the next 5 shots." The stenographer noted that Crozier objected, stating sufficient data had been collected. Barnes overruled him. The test continued. Shots 16 through 20 produced results that made Aberdeen's ballistic specialists check their instruments twice. 7.8 inches, 8.1 inches, 7.6 inches, 7.9 inches, 8.0 inches. Not a single shot penetrated less than 7.6 inches. Not a single shot missed the target plate. The consistency shocked everyone watching. Smooth bore penetration had varied by 1.4 inches across 15 successful hits, a 36% variation. Rifled penetration varied by only 0.5 inches across 20 shots, a mere 6% variation. You could predict what a rifled bazooka would do. You could trust it. Soldiers could aim these weapons like rifles and expect them to hit where aimed every single time. The observers moved downrange after the final shot to examine the armor plates up close. Every rifled impact showed the same distinctive pattern. A circular entrance hole, roughly 2 inches in diameter, perfectly perpendicular to the plate surface with clean edges indicating the shaped charge jet had formed correctly and penetrated without deflection. The smooth bore impacts looked dramatically different. Irregular holes, several showing evidence of jet deflection or partial penetration. Multiple strikes at angles where the rocket hit sideways or nose up. Back in the observation bunker, the ballistics team compiled final numbers while everyone waited in silence. The data was devastating to the smooth bore design. Hit probability at 50 yards showed smooth bore at 73%, rifled at 100%. Average penetration revealed smooth bore at 3.9 inches, rifled at 7.7 inches. Maximum confirmed penetration demonstrated smooth bore at 4.6 inches, rifled at 8.1 inches. But here's the number that mattered most to infantry officers making life and death decisions. Probability of defeating 80mm frontal armor on a Panzer IV, accounting for both hit probability and penetration capability. Smooth bore bazooka approximately 15%. Rifled bazooka 97%. A soldier with a rifled bazooka could reliably kill the most common German tank he'd face. A soldier with a smooth bore bazooka would die trying. The difference wasn't incremental improvement. It was the difference between a weapon that worked and a weapon that got you killed. Liu quan đôi mi có đủ can đảm để thừa nhận sai lầm. Thu hồi 14 khiên vũ khí đã sản xuất và bắt đầu lại từ đầu. Hay họ sẽ tiếp tục gửi binh sĩ vào chiến trường với vũ khí tồi ở phần 2. Chúng ta sẽ thấy quyết định đau đớn nhất trong lịch sử quân khí lực quân Mỹ và cách một ống phóng có ren xoắn thay đổi cục diện chiến tranh Bắc Phi Sicily và cuối cùng là toàn bộ châu Âu. Aberdeen Proving Ground, January 26, 1943. Henry Mohaupt's rifled bazooka just punched through 8 inches of armor with 100% accuracy. 20 shots, 20 hits nearly double the penetration of standard smooth-bore tubes. General Barnes stood watching, knowing this changed everything. But convincing the army to scrap 14,000 manufactured weapons and restart production, that would require something more dangerous than facing German tanks. It would require battling military bureaucracy, institutional pride, and men who'd rather die correct than admit they were wrong. And here's the terrifying part. While Mohaupt fought meetings and paperwork, American soldiers were still carrying useless bazookas into combat, still dying because their weapons couldn't scratch Panzer armor. The clock was ticking. Sicily invasion scheduled for July. North Africa campaign reaching its climax. Every day of delay meant more men trusting their lives to weapons that would get them killed. Và đây là lúc mọi thứ trở nên tồi tệ hơn nhiều so với bất kỳ ai tưởng tượng. General Barnes convened an emergency decision meeting in Aberdeen's headquarters building within 2 hours of the test completion. Present were Colonel Crozier, Captain Skinner, Henry Mohaupt, 3 ordnance production officers, and 2 logistics majors. The question wasn't whether to adopt rifling anymore. The test data made that decision automatic. The question was how fast they could retrofit existing production and whether to recall bazookas already deployed in combat theaters. The meeting started civil. It didn't stay that way long. Colonel Crozier opened with numbers. We've manufactured 14,000 M1 bazookas. 8,000 are stateside awaiting shipment. 6,000 have deployed. 3,000 to North Africa with Patton's forces. 2,000 to Pacific Theater. 1,000 to training bases in England preparing for European invasion. Recalling deployed weapons creates a 2 to 3 month gap where frontline units have zero anti-tank capability. Zero. You're asking me to disarm infantry companies facing Rommel's Africa Corps because of one successful test, Mohaupt responded quietly. I'm asking you to stop sending men into battle with weapons that miss 4 out of 10 shots. Your test results this morning showed 73% hit probability with smooth bore tubes. My rifles achieved 100%. Your smooth bore averaged 3.9 inches penetration. Mine averaged 7.7 inches. That's not incremental improvement. That's the difference between wounding a tank and killing it. Crozier's face flushed red. Your rifles, Mr. Mohaupt. You're a civilian contractor. These weapons belong to the United States Army, and one morning of testing in controlled conditions doesn't prove field reliability. What happens when soldiers maintain these tubes incorrectly? When rifling grooves fill with debris? When rockets are stored in humid conditions and corrosion affects spin rates? You've solved one problem and potentially created 5 others we won't discover until men die from them. The room went silent. Crozier had just articulated every bureaucrat's nightmare, taking responsibility for changing a system only to have that change fail catastrophically in ways nobody predicted. Captain Skinner started to object, but General Barnes raised one hand, stopping him. Barnes had commanded infantry in World War I. He'd watched men die attacking German machine gun positions because someone in a headquarters building had made bad equipment decisions. He wasn't going to repeat that mistake. Barnes turned to the production officers. How long to rifle existing stateside inventory? The senior production officer, a major named Whitmore, consulted his notes. Each tube requires approximately 8 minutes of machine time. Rifling machines cut spiral grooves in a single pass operation. We'd need to set up 3 facilities running parallel operations. Total conversion time for 8,000 tubes approximately 6 weeks, assuming no mechanical failures or quality control issues. Cost per tube? Barnes asked. $12 for machine time inspection and retesting. Total cost roughly $96,000 for stateside inventory. Doesn't include recalled weapons or production line retooling. Barnes did the math silently. $96,000 was nothing compared to the cost of replacing destroyed Sherman tanks or burying infantrymen killed because their weapons didn't work. He turned to the logistics majors. Worst case scenario. We recall all deployed bazookas today. How long until replacement rifles reach frontline units? The logistics officer, Major Perry, looked grim. North Africa 4 to 6 weeks given Mediterranean shipping. Pacific Theater 8 to 10 weeks. England 3 weeks. But Sir Recall creates the gap Colonel Crozier mentioned. Infantry companies lose their only portable anti-tank capability during that window. If Rommel attacks during that gap. If Rommel attacks, our boys die because they're carrying weapons that don't work anyway. Barnes cut him off. At least with a recall, we're working toward giving them something that does. He stood up, decision made. Rifle everything in stateside inventory immediately. Begin manufacturing new tubes with rifling already cut. Develop a field modification kit for deployed weapons. Priority shipment to units facing heaviest armor threats first. North Africa gets first rifles followed by England, then Pacific. Any questions? Crozier had one. Sir, with respect, you're overruling established procurement protocols based on preliminary testing. Regulation requires minimum 90-day evaluation period for major weapons modifications. We're proposing to skip that entirely. Barnes looked at him with an expression that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Colonel, on June 6 last year, a German Panzer company destroyed an entire British infantry battalion near Gazala. 400 men dead or captured in 90 minutes because their anti-tank rifles couldn't penetrate armor. I read that after-action report. I've read 50 more just like it. You want to wait 90 days for evaluation while men die with useless weapons. You can explain that to their families. I won't. The meeting ended. But Mohaupt's battle had just begun. Nyung anta timramot dongming but ngo trong ngui, ma kong ai ngi sa tin vào itung komot to mai zansu. Major General Levin Campbell Jr. commanded Army Ordnance's Research and Development Division. He'd heard about the Aberdeen test through unofficial channels and requested a private meeting with Mohaupt and Barnes. What made Campbell unusual among senior officers was his background. Before the war, he'd been a patent attorney specializing in industrial machinery. He understood how bureaucracy killed innovation and had made a career of circumventing it when lives were at stake. Campbell met them in his Pentagon office 3 days after the Aberdeen test. He got straight to the point. Colonel Crozier is going to fight this modification at every step, not because he thinks you're wrong, but because admitting you're right makes him look incompetent. He approved smooth-bore production. He certified those weapons as adequate. Your rifles prove he sent inadequate weapons to combat troops. That's a career-ending mistake, so he'll burn this entire program down rather than acknowledge it. Mohaupt asked the obvious question. Can he actually stop production modifications? Campbell smiled without humor. He can delay them, tie up authorization and procurement reviews, demand additional testing, question cost projections, file safety concerns, death by 1,000 paper cuts. By the time your rifles reach frontline units, the war might be over. Or we might have lost it. So what do we do? Barnes asked. Campbell pulled a folder from his desk. We bypass him entirely. I'm authorizing an emergency procurement exception under wartime exigency protocols. Section 7, paragraph 3 of the 1940 War Powers Act allows immediate equipment modifications without standard review if 3 conditions are met. First, clear and present danger to American forces. Second, demonstrated technical superiority through controlled testing. Third, approval by a flag officer with direct combat command authority. He slid papers across the desk. I've already drafted the authorization. General Eisenhower commands North African Theater. I served with him at Fort Leavenworth. He'll sign this the moment he sees your test data because his infantry is dying right now facing Panzers they can't kill. Once Eisenhower signs, Crozier can object all he wants. We'll have legal authority to begin modifications immediately. Barnes looked at the paperwork, then at Campbell. You're risking your career on this. Campbell's expression hardened. I'm risking paperwork delays. You're asking soldiers to risk their lives with broken weapons. I know which risk I'd rather take. Within a week, Eisenhower's signature arrived. Production modifications began. But convincing factories to retool was only half the battle. The real test would come when these rifles reached combat troops who'd learned not to trust their bazookas. Ngay thungim thukchin den. Knew that by Mohaupt's modification would be remembered as the genius idea that somehow made things worse. April 1943. The first rifled bazookas reached the 1st Armored Division in Tunisia, North Africa. 200 M1A1 launchers, the new designation for rifled tubes, arrived at the port of Algiers and were distributed to infantry companies preparing for the final push against German forces near Bizerte. The weapons arrived with no fanfare, no special training, just a 1-page technical bulletin explaining the difference. Soldiers who'd been carrying smooth-bore bazookas for months looked at the rifled tubes with deep suspicion. They'd learned the hard way not to trust equipment that headquarters promised would work. Staff Sergeant Julius River commanded a bazooka team in Company E 16th Infantry Regiment. His team had engaged German armor 3 times with smooth-bore bazookas. They'd fired 11 rockets total. They'd scored 4 hits. 0 kills. 2 of his men had died when a Panzer IV's machine gunner caught them reloading. River hated bazookas with a passion that burned cold and absolute. When his supply sergeant handed him a rifled M1A1 on April 20th, River's response was unprintable. His supply sergeant, a pragmatic Texan named Morrison, just shrugged. Orders say these actually work. Test reports claim 100% hit rate, 8 inches of penetration. I think it's bullshit too, but we're stuck with them. River examined the rifling grooves inside the tube, running his finger along the spiral cuts. These grooves gonna fill with sand first time we go prone. Then what? Morrison had no answer. Nobody did. The rifles were untested in desert conditions, untested under combat stress, untested by soldiers who'd already lost faith in the weapon system. 3 days later, that testing began in the most brutal way possible. April 23, 1943, 08:47 hours. Company E was advancing through a wadi 3 miles south of Bazooka when German armor appeared. 2 Panzer IVs hull down behind a ridge supporting a reinforced infantry platoon. The American advance stopped cold. Company commander radioed for artillery support. Response time, 20 minutes. The Panzers had clear fields of fire across 400 yards of open ground. Any attempt to advance meant crossing that killing zone under machine gun and cannon fire. Standard doctrine called for infantry to dig in and wait for friendly armor or artillery. But River saw something the company commander didn't. A dry streambed hidden from the Panzer positions by a slight fold in the terrain ran to within 70 yards of the German tanks. He grabbed his rifled bazooka and 2 rockets. His assistant gunner, Private First Class Eddie Mosley, looked at him like he'd gone insane. "Sarge, we can't hit shit with these things past 50 yards. You know that." River checked his rifle tube, loading the first rocket. "New tubes, supposed to actually work. Guess we're gonna find out if headquarters was lying." They crawled 300 yards through that streambed, moving slowly, staying low. German infantry hadn't spotted the approach. The Panzers sat stationary crews confident their position was secure. River set up at 70 yards, almost point-blank range by bazooka standards, but still twice the distance at which smooth-bore tubes became unreliable. He aimed at the nearest Panzer's hull just below the turret ring. The shaped charge jet needed to penetrate the crew compartment, not just the engine block. He squeezed the trigger. The rocket left the tube clean, no wobble, spinning fast. It flew arrow straight across those 70 yards and struck exactly where River had aimed. The detonation sent a jet of superheated copper plasma through 80 millimeters of armor plating, through the crew compartment, through the ammunition storage. The Panzer's entire turret lifted 6 inches as internal ammunition cooked off. The crew never had a chance to bail out. Mosley stared, genuinely shocked. Holy shit, it actually worked. River was already reloading. The 2nd Panzer's crew, seeing their companion brewing up, started backing down the ridge to escape. River led the moving target, accounting for speed and angle. He fired. The 2nd rocket hit the Panzer's side armor at 90 yards, penetrating clean, killing the tank instantly. 2 shots. 2 kills. At distances where smooth-bore bazookas would have missed more often than hitting. River's after-action report filed that evening contained 1 sentence that would be quoted in training manuals for the next decade. The rifled launcher performed exactly as advertised. First shot, total kill both engagements. My men couldn't believe the damn thing actually worked like they promised. That report reached General Campbell's desk within 48 hours. He forwarded it to every ordnance depot and training command in the Army with a single note attached. "This is why we changed the design. Get rifles to combat units immediately." By June 1943, production had shifted entirely to rifled models. The M9 rocket launcher, an improved version with better sights and a 2-piece tube for easier transport, started rolling off assembly lines with rifling standard. These were the weapons that landed at Salerno in September, where the 36th Infantry Division used them to break up German Panzer counterattacks on the beachhead. Lieutenant Colonel William Darby's Ranger battalions reported bazooka teams accounting for 11 confirmed tank kills during the first 3 days of fighting. Not wounded, not disabled. Killed, burning wrecks with dead crews inside. The difference wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. Soldiers carrying rifled bazookas didn't see themselves as victims waiting for tanks to kill them. They saw themselves as tank hunters. Infantry companies started developing ambush tactics specifically built around bazooka teams, using terrain and surprise to get close enough for guaranteed kills. German armor commanders noticed. Panzer Company after-action reports from Italy in late 1943 started mentioning a disturbing trend. American infantry was becoming dangerous. Tanks that previously rolled through defensive positions with impunity were now getting killed at close range by foot soldiers with portable rockets. Wehrmacht intelligence initially thought Americans had fielded an entirely new weapon system. They captured several M9 launchers in October 1943 and sent them to Berlin for analysis. German engineers examined the rifles, measured the penetration, tested the accuracy, and reached an embarrassing conclusion. The Americans had simply added rifling to their existing design. The same modification German Panzerschreck teams were already using. The same modification that German intelligence had recommended to American ordnance through captured documents, thinking the Americans were too bureaucratic to actually implement it. They'd been wrong. Mohaupt had forced the change through, and now German tank crews were paying the price. But success created new problems that nobody had anticipated. As word spread through infantry units that rifles actually worked, demand exploded. Units that previously requested minimal bazooka allocation suddenly wanted every man carrying one. Production couldn't keep pace. By December 1943, there was a 6-week waiting list for rifles. Some infantry divisions in Italy were still carrying smooth-bore tubes because rifles hadn't reached them yet. Those divisions suffered noticeably higher casualties when engaging armor. The weapon worked. The logistics system couldn't deliver it fast enough. Mohaupt, watching this from his consulting position at Aberdeen, saw the irony clearly. 6 months earlier, the army hadn't wanted his rifles. Now they couldn't manufacture them fast enough. Colonel Crozier, who'd fought the modification so bitterly, was now taking credit for the program's success, telling Pentagon briefings that thorough ordnance testing had identified and corrected bazooka deficiencies. Mohaupt didn't care about credit. He cared about the letters he started receiving from soldiers. Short notes, usually written in foxholes or field hospitals. "Your rifle saved my life. We killed 3 tanks yesterday, all first-shot hits. Thank you for giving us something that works." Those letters, more than any test data or official commendations, told Mohaupt he'd succeeded. But success brought attention, and attention brought danger. Because German intelligence was now asking a very specific question. Who was the engineer who'd modified American bazookas, and could he be eliminated before he developed something even more dangerous? Nhưng khi tin tức lan ra toàn chiến trường châu Âu, tình báo Đức bắt đầu phát triển kế hoạch riêng. Và cuộc chiến thực sự giữa ý tưởng và phần ý tưởng mới thực sự bắt đầu. Henry Mohaupt's rifled bazooka transformed from rejected idea to proven weapon in 8 months. January 1945. Aberdeen test showed 8 inches of penetration, 100% accuracy. April 1943. First combat kills in Tunisia. By September, Rangers at Salerno were hunting panzers like prey animals. But success brought attention from the worst possible source. German intelligence had been watching. Wehrmacht armor commanders were losing tanks to American infantry at rates that defied pre-war doctrine, and they wanted answers. Why were supposedly inferior American rocket launchers suddenly killing Tigers and Panthers at ranges where smooth-bore tubes couldn't scratch paint? Berlin's analysis reached a conclusion that terrified German high command. The Americans hadn't developed a new weapon. They'd perfected an old one. Và bây giờ đây không còn là thử nghiệm trong sa mạc hay đồi nước nữa. Đây là cuộc chiến công nghệ toàn diện trên mọi chiến trường từ Bắc Phi đến Ý và đặt cược là mạng sống hàng nghìn binh sĩ mỗi ngày. November 1943. German Army Intelligence Fremde Heere West compiled a classified report titled American Infantry Anti-Tank Capability Assessment. The document landed on Field Marshal Albert Kesselring's desk in Italy with red priority markings. Kesselring commanded all German forces in the Mediterranean theater. He'd been fighting Americans for a year and watched his Panzer losses climb steadily. The intelligence report explained why. Between June and October 1943, German armor casualties in Italy increased 340% compared to the same period in North Africa. Tank losses attributed to American bazookas specifically rose from 8% of total armor casualties to 31%. That wasn't incremental change. That was a fundamental shift in infantry lethality. The report included captured M9 launchers' ammunition samples and interrogation transcripts from American prisoners. German engineers tested the rifles at Kummersdorf, proving grounds outside Berlin. Their findings matched Mohaupt's Aberdeen results almost exactly. 8 inches of penetration, 95% hit probability at 100 yards. Consistent performance across temperature ranges and combat conditions. The grooves, those simple spiral cuts inside the launch tube, had transformed a marginal weapon into something genuinely dangerous. Kesselring called an emergency conference of Panzer commanders on November 18th at his headquarters near Rome. Present were generals commanding every armored division in Italy. The topic was simple. How do we stop American infantry from killing our tanks? The discussion revealed something unprecedented. German armor doctrine developed over years of combat in Poland. France and Russia assumed infantry posed minimal threat to properly employed tanks. Tanks supported each other. Tanks worked with infantry. Tanks avoided close terrain where ambushes were possible. But Italian terrain was all close terrain. Mountains, valleys, villages, forests. Perfect ambush country. And American bazooka teams were exploiting it ruthlessly. General Heinrich von Vietinghoff, commanding the 10th Army, reported his experiences bluntly. My panzer companies are refusing to operate in built-up areas without overwhelming infantry support. 3 times last month, bazooka teams destroyed lead tanks from building positions at under 50 yards, blocking narrow streets and trapping entire columns. We lost 11 tanks in Casino alone because American infantry teams positioned in ruins could engage from concealment with near-certain kills. This is unacceptable. We're ceding tactical initiative to foot soldiers with portable rockets. The solutions proposed revealed how fundamentally rifles had changed the battlefield. German armor would now advance with infantry screens in close terrain, specifically to locate and suppress bazooka teams before they could fire. Tanks would no longer operate independently in urban or mountain environments. Wehrmacht engineering units would develop spaced armor and Schutzen side skirts to degrade shaped charge effectiveness. German infantry would receive priority training in hunting American bazooka positions. And German intelligence would attempt to determine who had designed the rifled tubes and whether that person could be eliminated. That last point appeared in classified addendums to the conference notes. Wehrmacht intelligence had traced the modification to Aberdeen Proving Ground and identified Henry Mohaupt as the civilian engineer responsible. An agent network in neutral Switzerland, Mohaupt's home country, began gathering information on his family, his contacts, his routine. The plan was never formalized in writing, but the intent was clear. If you can't defeat the weapon, eliminate the designer before he creates something worse. Nhưng đây không phải thử thách duy nhất mà Mohaupt và vũ khí của ông phải đối mặt trong những tháng cuối năm 1943. December 1943, Fort Benning, Georgia. The Army's infantry school reported a disturbing pattern. Rifled bazookas were experiencing premature detonations at a rate of approximately 1 in 800 firings. Not common, but frequent enough that 3 soldiers had died and 11 had been seriously wounded in training accidents over the past 6 weeks. Investigation traced the failures to moisture infiltration in stored rocket motors. The waterproofing compound used in production had proven inadequate under humid southern conditions. Water seeped into rocket propellant, creating pressure inconsistencies during motor burn. Some rockets detonated inside the launch tube before clearing the muzzle. The findings triggered immediate panic in Army ordnance. Rifled bazookas had become the centerpiece of American infantry anti-tank doctrine. Over 40,000 were now in service across all theaters. If the waterproofing failure was systemic, they were potentially looking at catastrophic field failures affecting thousands of weapons. Colonel Crozier, still nursing his bureaucratic wounds from being overruled, seized the opportunity. He filed a formal safety review, demanding all rifles be recalled for inspection and potential remanufacture, with improved waterproofing. The recall would take 4 months minimum and cost over $2 million. General Campbell Mohaupt's Pentagon ally called an emergency technical conference. Present were Mohaupt ammunition manufacturers, chemical engineers, and field representatives from combat theaters. The question was whether Crozier's recall was necessary, or whether he was using a legitimate but limited problem to damage the rifle program he'd opposed from the beginning. Mohaupt examined failed rockets personally. His conclusion was technical and specific. The waterproofing failure affected only rockets manufactured between August and October 1943 at a single contractor facility in Pennsylvania. That contractor had substituted a cheaper waterproofing compound without proper testing. The solution wasn't recalling all weapons. It was identifying and replacing the specific defective batch, approximately 12,000 rockets total, while implementing better quality control for future production. Campbell approved Mohaupt's recommendation over Crozier's objections. Defective rockets were traced through serial numbers and replaced within 3 weeks. Training accidents stopped immediately. But the incident revealed something troubling. Success had made the rifled bazooka program politically valuable, which meant people were now using it as a weapon in bureaucratic battles that had nothing to do with killing German tanks. Mohaupt, watching from Aberdeen, realized his modification had become bigger than engineering. It was now institutional policy, which meant it would be defended and attacked for reasons having nothing to do with whether it worked. He didn't care about Pentagon politics. He cared about letters from soldiers. Those letters kept arriving dozens per week now. Most were short. Some were profound. One from a sergeant in Italy named Anthony DeFranco stuck with him. "Your rifle saved my squad twice. Once near Salerno, once at Volturno River. Both times we killed German tanks that would have killed us. I don't know how to thank a man for giving us a chance to live. But thank you." That letter arrived 3 days before the Battle of San Pietro, where rifles would face their most severe test yet. "Nhung Roy, Motsu Kien Taidoi Mai Tu, Va Chung Ming Rang. Y Tung Ku Mohaupt, Không Chỉ Hoạt Động Trên Giấy Tờ, Hay Trung Thu Nghiêm, Mà Còn Có Thể Quyết Định Thắng Bại Của Cả Một Trận Chiến Quan Trọng." December 11th, 1943. San Pietro, Infine, Italy. A medieval village perched on a hilltop commanding the Liri Valley approaches to Monte Cassino. German forces had fortified San Pietro into a fortress. Stone buildings provided cover. Steep terrain limited American armor mobility. The 143rd Infantry Regiment, 36th Division, received orders to take the village. Intelligence estimated 1 German battalion defending, supported by at least 6 Panzer IV tanks positioned in defilade, where American Shermans couldn't engage them effectively. The attack began at 0600 hours under heavy fog. 2 American infantry companies, roughly 400 men, advanced up the slope toward San Pietro. German resistance was immediate and devastating. Machine gun fire from prepared positions, mortar shells walking through American formations, and those 6 Panzers firing from covered positions, methodically destroying any American attempt to concentrate forces. By 0800 hours, the attack had stalled 300 yards short of the village. Casualties were mounting. American Shermans couldn't advance up the steep approach without exposing their thin belly armor to German anti-tank guns. Lieutenant Colonel William Martin, commanding the assault, made a decision that would be studied in infantry schools for decades. He pulled his rifle companies back into defilade and called forward every bazooka team in his battalion. 18 teams, 36 men carrying M9 rifles. His plan was simple and desperate. Bazooka teams would infiltrate through dead ground and building ruins to within 50 yards of German tank positions. Teams would engage simultaneously on his signal. Goal was to destroy or suppress all 6 Panzers in under 2 minutes before German infantry could locate and kill the American teams. Staff Sergeant DeFranco, the same soldier who'd written to Mohaupt, led one of those teams. His assigned target was a Panzer IV positioned behind a collapsed stone wall 200 yards upslope. The approach was murder. Open ground swept by German machine guns. DeFranco and his assistant gunner, Private Raymond Kozlowski, crawled 150 yards through a drainage ditch filled with freezing mud. Took them 40 minutes. German infantry positions were close enough to hear conversations. The Panzer crew was smoking confident their position was secure. DeFranco set up at 60 yards partially concealed behind rubble. He loaded his M9, checked the sight picture, and waited for Martin's signal. 3 red flares at 0920 hours. 18 bazooka teams fired within 5 seconds of each other. DeFranco's rocket hit the Panzer's side armor just below the turret ring. Penetration was clean. The shaped charge jet burned through into the crew compartment. Secondary explosion followed as ammunition cooked off. The tank burned. Crew never evacuated. Across San Pietro's approaches, similar scenes played out. 6 German tanks engaged simultaneously. 4 killed outright within 30 seconds. 1 disabled with track damage. 1 retreated down the reverse slope crew, abandoning it after multiple hits shattered vision blocks and external equipment. The entire engagement lasted 90 seconds, from first shot to last. German infantry watching their armor support vanish in minutes lost cohesion. Some positions continued fighting, others withdrew. By 1100 hours, American infantry was clearing San Pietro building by building. DeFranco's after-action report, filed that evening while sitting in a captured German command post, contained assessment that would be quoted in training manuals. Rifles performed flawlessly under worst possible conditions. Mud-cold stress, moving targets, partial concealment. Every team in our company scored hits. German armor burned or ran. This changes everything about how infantry fights tanks. We're not victims anymore. We're hunters. That report reached General Mark Clark, commanding 5th Army in Italy, within 48 hours. Clark forwarded it to Eisenhower with a note. "This weapon is winning battles. Expand production immediately." The Battle of San Pietro demonstrated something that test ranges couldn't prove. Rifled bazookas worked under catastrophic combat conditions against prepared enemies in defensible terrain. More importantly, they changed infantry psychology. Soldiers carrying rifles didn't wait passively for friendly armor to arrive. They took initiative, maneuvered aggressively hunted enemy tanks like dangerous but killable prey. That shift in mindset was worth more than any technical specification. Tintuk ve chin thang ne, lun yun kep lu quan mi, va taidoi kek moingui ngi ve chin trang chong tung kubo bin. January 1944. Every major American newspaper ran stories about San Pietro. Correspondents embedded with the 143rd Infantry described bazooka teams destroying German armor at close range. Life magazine published a photo essay titled, "The Rocket That Kills Tanks." Newsreel footage showed soldiers demonstrating M9 launchers in training. The weapon became famous. More importantly, it became doctrine. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning revised its anti-tank training to emphasize aggressive bazooka employment. Every rifle company would now have minimum 6 bazooka teams. Teams would train in stalking, concealment, and coordinated ambush tactics. The goal was creating tank hunters, not defensive positions. Statistical analysis from Mediterranean theater showed the impact clearly. In the 6 months before rifled bazookas deployed, American infantry accounted for 8% of German armor losses. In the 6 months after, that number climbed to 34%. Tank destroyer battalions and American armor still killed more German tanks overall, but infantry was now contributing significantly to attrition warfare. German panzer divisions operating in Italy reported losing on average 2.3 tanks per week to American bazooka attacks. That attrition forced German armor to operate more cautiously, which reduced their tactical effectiveness, which gave American forces more freedom of movement. German responses revealed how seriously Wehrmacht took the threat. By February 1944, all German tanks in Italy received Schürzen side armor skirts. These thin steel plates, mounted several inches away from the hull, were designed to detonate shaped charges prematurely before jets could fully form. The modification reduced bazooka penetration by approximately 30%. But American soldiers adapted. They started aiming for rear armor turret rings and engine decks rather than side hulls. They waited for closer shots where Schürzen were less effective. The technology race continued. Henry Mohaupt watched this evolution from Aberdeen with mixed feelings. His rifles were saving American lives. The letters kept arriving, hundreds now, from soldiers who'd used M9s to kill tanks that would have killed them. But rifles were also revealing their limitations. 8 inches of penetration was adequate against Panzer IVs and early Panthers. Against Tiger IIs and jogged Panthers with 150mm frontal armor rifles struggled. Mohaupt began working on a larger 3.5-inch design that would become the M20 Super Bazooka, capable of 11 inches of penetration. The engineering arms race never stopped. By June 1944, D-Day, every American infantry company hitting Normandy beaches carried at least 4 bazooka teams with rifled M9s. The weapons proved essential not just against armor, but against fortified German positions where shaped charges could blow through concrete emplacements. After-action reports from Omaha Beach noted bazooka teams clearing 12 pillboxes during the first 6 hours, allowing infantry to push inland. The rifle Mohaupt designed for desert warfare in Tunisia was now winning battles from French hedgerows to Italian mountains to Pacific Islands, where Marines used them against Japanese bunkers. Total Impact Assessment compiled by Army Ordnance in July 1944 estimated rifles had contributed to destruction or disabling of over 800 German tanks and self-propelled guns in European theater alone. More importantly, rifles had prevented estimated 4,000 American casualties by giving infantry effective anti-tank capability before friendly armor arrived. Those numbers were conservative estimates. The real impact was psychological. German armor no longer dominated battlefields the way Panzers had in 1940. American infantry had tools that worked and confidence to use them aggressively.
Điều gì xảy ra với người đàn ông đứng sau thành công này? Liệu ông có được ghi nhận xứng đáng? Hay như nhiều người vô danh khác, ông biến mất sau những gì mình tạo ra? Câu chuyện này còn một chương cuối đầy bất ngờ mà ít người biết đến về số phận của Mohaupt và di sản thực sự của phát minh ông để lại.
Henry Mohaupt's rifled bazooka traveled an impossible journey. January 1943. A Swiss engineer stood in a Maryland proving ground, watching colonels dismiss his idea as reckless. April 1943. His rifles killed their first Panzers in Tunisia. December 1943. 18 bazooka teams destroyed 6 German tanks in 90 seconds at San Pietro, changing how infantry fought armor forever. By June 1944, every American soldier hitting Normandy beaches carried weapons built on Mohaupt's principle. Over 800 German tanks destroyed. An estimated 4,000 American lives saved. All because one civilian engineer refused to accept that smooth-bore tubes were good enough.
Nhưng điều gì xảy ra với người đàn ông đứng sau thành công này khi khói súng tan và chiến tranh kết thúc? Câu chuyện có một twist cuối cùng mà không ai ngờ tới về vinh quang sự lãng quên và cái giá thực sự của việc thay đổi lịch sử. Bởi vì thành công đôi khi đi kèm những mất mát mà không tỏ báo nào đưa tin và không huân chương nào bù đắp được.
May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Celebrations erupted across America. Soldiers would be coming home. The war that had consumed 6 years and millions of lives was finally ending, at least in Europe. Henry Mohaupt was 55 years old, still working as a civilian consultant at Aberdeen Proving Ground. He'd spent 3 years refining shaped charge technology, developing the M20 Super Bazooka, capable of 11 inches penetration, and consulting on various rocket propulsion projects. His rifles had become so successful that most soldiers didn't even know they were different from the original smoothbore design. The modification had been absorbed into standard production. Rifling was now just how bazookas were made. Mohaupt received no medals, The Army didn't award decorations to civilian contractors regardless of their contributions. He received no public recognition. Newspapers credited Army Ordnance Department innovation for the bazooka's effectiveness. Captain Skinner got a Legion of Merit for his role in rocket launcher development. General Barnes received commendations for modernizing infantry anti-tank capabilities. Colonel Crozier, who'd fought the modification, bitterly retired as a brigadier general with full honors. Mohaupt's name appeared in some technical reports and patent filings buried in bureaucratic language that made revolutionary innovation sound like routine engineering. He didn't seem to care. Letters from soldiers kept arriving through 1945 and into 1946 as men returned home and looked up the engineer whose rifles had saved their lives. These letters, hundreds of them, told stories that official reports never captured. Sergeant DeFranco from San Pietro wrote describing how his entire squad survived the Italian campaign because they trusted their M9s to work when it mattered. A Marine from Iwo Jima explained how bazooka teams had cleared Japanese bunkers that would have cost dozens of lives to assault directly. A ranger from Normandy simply wrote, "You gave us a fighting chance. That's all we needed." Mohaupt kept those letters in a wooden box in his Aberdeen office. He never showed them to anyone. When interviewed years later by military historians, he deflected questions about personal recognition. The weapon worked. Soldiers lived. That was the goal. Everything else is just paperwork. But people who knew him noticed something subtle. He'd aged dramatically during the war years. The stress of fighting bureaucracy, while men died with inadequate weapons, had taken a toll that victory couldn't erase. By 1946, he was ready to leave Aberdeen and return to Switzerland. The Army tried to keep him. They offered a permanent consulting position, significant salary increase, and promises of more interesting projects. Mohaupt declined. He'd done what he came to do. His shaped charge designs and rifling modification had proven successful beyond anyone's expectations. He had no interest in becoming another Pentagon fixture attending meetings and navigating politics. In December 1946, he boarded a ship in New York Harbor, sailed back to Switzerland, and largely disappeared from American military circles. His departure was noted in one brief paragraph in an Aberdeen administrative report. Consultant Mohaupt contract terminated effective December 31, 1946. Contributions to warhead development and launcher modifications noted with appreciation. That should have been the end of the story. A brilliant engineer who changed warfare then quietly faded into history while others took credit for his work. But what happened to the people around him reveals how success and failure in war create unexpected legacies. General Campbell, who'd bypassed Crozier to authorize rifle testing, rose to 3-star rank and commanded Army Materiel Command, overseeing all weapons development through the Korean War. He made sure rifle designs became standard for every subsequent American rocket launcher. Captain Skinner, retired as a colonel, wrote a memoir that mentioned Mohaupt exactly once in 300 pages and spent the 1950s consulting for defense contractors developing guided missiles. Colonel Crozier, the man who'd called rifling reckless and fought to maintain smooth bore production, became a cautionary tale taught at Army War College. His case study appeared in courses about institutional resistance to innovation, how personal pride and bureaucratic momentum can prevent life-saving improvements from reaching soldiers who need them. Students learned that Crozier wasn't evil or stupid, just trapped in a system that rewarded caution and punished risk-taking even when risk-taking would save lives. His career ended successfully by military standards, but his legacy was complicated by the knowledge that he'd tried to stop something that changed warfare. Nhưng đi sang thực sự của Mohaupt không nằm ở huân chương hay chức vụ, mà ở những vũ khí được tạo ra trong 50 năm tiếp theo, dựa trên nguyên lý đơn giản mà ông đã phải chiến đấu để chứng minh. Korea, June 1950. North Korean T-34 tanks crossed the 38th parallel, smashing through South Korean defensive lines. American infantry units rushed to Korea, carried M20 super bazookas, the 3.5-inch rifles Mohaupt had helped develop in late 1944. These weapons, with 11 inches of penetration capability, stopped T-34 advances cold. The Battle of the Pusan Perimeter in August 1950 saw American bazooka teams account for 41 confirmed T-34 kills in 2 weeks. Rifled tubes that spun rockets for accuracy and stability had become so standard that nobody questioned the design anymore. It just worked. Vietnam, 1965 to 1973. American soldiers carried M72 Law rockets, disposable single-shot weapons with pre-rifled launch tubes built into the design. Every Law fired in Vietnam used spin stabilization principles Mohaupt had fought for at Aberdeen 22 years earlier. The weapon proved effective against bunkers buildings and light armor. Over 200,000 Laws were expended during the war. The rifling concept had evolved from controversial modification to unquestioned doctrine. Military engineers designing new rockets didn't even consider smooth bore tubes anymore. Rifling was automatic standard mandatory. Desert Storm, 1991. Coalition forces carried AT-4 anti-tank weapons featuring advanced rifling patterns optimized through computer modeling. The math was sophisticated, but the principle remained identical to what Mohaupt had proposed in that January 1943 meeting. Spin the rocket. Stabilize the flight. Hit what you aim at. Iraqi armor discovered like German Panzers 50 years earlier, that well-equipped infantry with accurate portable rockets were extremely dangerous. American soldiers in 1991 probably never heard of Henry Mohaupt, but they benefited from his work every time they shouldered an AT-4 and trusted it to fly straight. The technology spread globally. Soviet RPG-7s, introduced in 1961, used rifled designs similar to Mohaupt's original modification. Chinese Type 69 rockets incorporated spin stabilization. Israeli, British, French, German armies all adopted rifled rocket launchers as standard infantry equipment. By the 1980s, over 60 countries were manufacturing or using rocket weapons, based directly or indirectly on principles Mohaupt had to force through skeptical army bureaucracy. The total number of rifled rocket launchers produced worldwide between 1943 and 2000 exceeded 50 million units. That's conservative estimate, not counting copies and unlicensed variants. Statistical analysis compiled by U.S. Army historians in 1995 attempted to calculate Mohaupt's total impact. Direct combat effectiveness of American rifled bazookas in World War II accounted for destruction of approximately 200 to 400 German and Japanese armored vehicles and fortified positions. Indirect effects preventing American casualties by providing reliable anti-tank capability were estimated at saving between 8,000 and 12,000 American lives during the war. Post-war applications in Korea, Vietnam, and subsequent conflicts where rifled rockets prevented enemy armor breakthroughs or reduced friendly casualties while clearing fortifications were impossible to calculate precisely. But conservative estimates suggested rifled rocket technology had influenced outcomes involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers across multiple wars over 50 years. The principle extended beyond military applications. Rifled rocket tubes influenced civilian aerospace engineering, particularly in stabilization systems for small satellite launch vehicles and emergency escape rockets. The physics of using spin to stabilize projectiles with active propulsion informed designs for everything from experimental aircraft to industrial demolition charges. Mohaupt's shaped charge work, combined with his rifling innovation, became foundational to an entire category of directional energy weapons that found uses in mining construction and emergency rescue operations. Every time a demolition team used a shaped charge to precisely cut through steel or concrete, they were applying principles Mohaupt had refined under pressure to stop German tanks. Nhưng bài học lớn nhất mà câu chuyện này để lại không phải về kỹ thuật hay số liệu thống kê, mà về bản chất của sự đổi mới, và tại sao những ý tưởng tốt nhất thường phải chiến đấu khốc liệt nhất để được thực hiện. Henry Mohaupt's story reveals something profound about how innovation actually happens versus how we imagine it happens. We like to think good ideas are immediately recognized and adopted, that smart people see solutions and implement them efficiently. Reality is messier and more frustrating. Mohaupt had a simple logical modification that testing proved worked dramatically better than existing designs, and he still spent months fighting institutional resistance, navigating bureaucracy, and risking his professional reputation to force implementation. Why? Because organizations, especially large hierarchical ones like militaries, are built to resist change. Change means admitting previous decisions were wrong. Change means disrupting established production. Change means someone takes responsibility if the new approach fails catastrophically. Colonel Crozier wasn't defending smoothbore bazookas because he was stupid. He was defending them because he'd approved their production, and Mohaupt's rifles made that approval look like a costly mistake. Institutional self-protection often matters more than objective effectiveness. This pattern repeats throughout military history. British generals in World War I resisted machine guns and insisted cavalry remained relevant. American Navy admirals before World War II fought against aircraft carriers, insisting battleships would dominate naval warfare. German High Command in 1944 continued building Tiger tanks that were too heavy and complex instead of focusing on more practical designs. In each case, innovation was available, but institutional momentum and personal careers created resistance. The people who overcome this resistance share certain characteristics. They're technically competent enough to be credible. They're stubborn enough to keep pushing despite rejection. They find allies with authority who can bypass normal channels, and they're often outsiders to the system, which means they lack career concerns that make insiders cautious. Mohaupt was a civilian contractor, not a career army officer. He could propose controversial changes without worrying about promotion boards or fitness reports. That freedom to challenge accepted doctrine was exactly what made him effective and exactly what made him threatening to people like Crozier. Other crazy ideas that changed warfare followed similar patterns. British engineer Barnes Wallis proposed bouncing bombs to destroy German dams in 1942. Military experts called it impossible and ridiculous. Wallis built prototypes, proved the concept worked, and Operation Chastise successfully breached the Mona and Eder dams in May 1943. American physicist Luis Alvarez suggested using radar to guide bombs in 1941. Bombardment generals argued it was unnecessary complication, since bombardiers could aim visually. Alvarez persisted, and radar-guided bombing became standard by 1944, dramatically increasing accuracy in poor weather. Soviet engineer Mikhail Kalashnikov designed the AK-47 rifle using stamped parts instead of machined components. Soviet ordnance officials initially rejected it as too crude compared to traditional manufacturing. Production started anyway, and the AK-47 became the most widely produced rifle in history, with over 100 million manufactured. The pattern is consistent. Outsider proposes simple but radical change. Establishment rejects it for institutional reasons. Outsider finds ally with authority or proves concept independently. Success forces adoption despite resistance. This isn't unique to military contexts. Business history is filled with similar stories. Kodak invented digital cameras but resisted them because they threatened film sales. Blockbuster rejected Netflix's partnership offer because streaming seemed like a niche market. Established organizations struggle with disruptive innovation, not because they're incompetent, but because innovation threatens the expertise and investments that made them successful originally. The lesson for modern times is uncomfortable but valuable. Good ideas aren't enough. Technical superiority isn't enough. You need stubborn persistence, powerful allies, and willingness to fight people who have valid reasons from their perspective to oppose you. Progress requires overcoming not just technical problems, but human and institutional resistance. That's exhausting and unfair and absolutely necessary.
Và có một chi tiết cuối cùng về số phận của Henry Mohaupt mà hầu hết mọi người không biết, một sự thật vừa được công bố gần đây từ các tài liệu giải mật. làm thay đổi cách chúng ta hiểu câu chuyện này. December 2019. A Swiss military historian named Andreas Weber was researching World War II weapons development when he discovered something strange in newly declassified Wehrmacht intelligence files. German military intelligence had identified Henry Mohaupt as the engineer responsible for American bazooka modifications by late 1943. They'd compiled a surprisingly detailed dossier on him. Background in Switzerland. Work at Aberdeen. Family connections. Daily routines. The files revealed something darker. German intelligence had authorized an operation coded Steinbrecher to eliminate Mohaupt before he could develop more effective weapons. The operation was planned for early 1944, targeting Mohaupt either in Switzerland during a potential visit or through an agent infiltrated into Aberdeen's civilian contractor community. Steinbrecher never executed. Not because German intelligence changed priorities, but because Allied counterintelligence detected preliminary surveillance in January 1944 and shut it down. FBI arrested 3 German agents operating in the United States, one of whom had reconnaissance photographs of Aberdeen Proving Ground and a list of civilian contractors including Mohaupt's name. The arrests were kept secret at the time to avoid compromising counterintelligence sources. Mohaupt was never officially informed he'd been targeted for assassination. He lived and worked at Aberdeen through 1946, completely unaware that enemy intelligence considered him dangerous enough to kill. Weber's research revealed another detail that added irony to the story. German engineers, after capturing and analyzing American M9 bazookas in Italy, had already developed their own rifle designs. The Panzerschreck and later Panzerfaust variants incorporated spin stabilization similar to Mohaupt's modification. German infantry used these weapons effectively against Soviet armor on the Eastern Front throughout 1944 and 1945. The technology Mohaupt fought so hard to implement in American service ended up being adopted by Germans, Russians, and eventually every major military force. The innovation that Colonel Crozier called reckless and unnecessary became universal standard doctrine that nobody questioned. The twist wasn't that Mohaupt's rifles changed American tactics, it was that they changed everyone's tactics, including the enemies they were designed to fight. There's a final detail that perfectly captures the absurdity and profundity of this story. The first rifled bazooka prototype Mohaupt built for the January 1943 Aberdeen test was preserved. It sat in storage at Aberdeen Proving Ground for decades, mostly forgotten, until museum curators cataloging historical weapons discovered it in 1987. The tube showed clear machining marks where Mohaupt had cut the spiral grooves by hand, testing his theory before official approval. That prototype, the physical object that proved a controversial idea worked and changed infantry warfare, is now displayed at the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. The placard identifies it as M1 Rocket Launcher Prototype, 1943, with a brief description of rifling modifications improving accuracy. Henry Mohaupt's name appears in small text at the bottom. Most visitors walk past without stopping. The tube looks like any other piece of military equipment, unremarkable unless you know its story. Mohaupt died in Switzerland on April 12, 1981, at age 91. His obituary in Swiss newspapers mentioned his work on explosives and shaped charges, but nothing about bazookas or the Aberdeen test that changed warfare. He'd lived quietly after the war, consulting occasionally on industrial applications of shaped charges, but mostly staying out of military circles. People who knew him in his later years described a modest, precise man who rarely discussed his wartime work. When asked about his contributions, he'd usually deflect with a comment about doing his job and being fortunate to work with competent soldiers. He kept that wooden box of letters from soldiers, hundreds of them testimonials from men who'd survived because his rifles worked when their lives depended on it. His family donated those letters to Aberdeen Proving Ground archives after his death. Researchers studying infantry weapons development occasionally read them,
but they've never been published or widely shared. Từ một kỹ sư người Thụy Sĩ với một ý tưởng được coi là liều lĩnh và nguy hiểm, đến vũ khí thay đổi cách hàng triệu binh sĩ chiến đấu suốt 7 thập kỷ. Henry Mohaupt đã chứng minh rằng đổi mới thực sự không đến từ những người quyền lực nhất hay tiếng nói to nhất, mà từ những người đủ cứng đầu để tin vào dữ liệu khi mọi người xung quanh chỉ tin vào quy trình. Và nhờ đó, hơn 50 triệu vũ khí phóng rocket được sản xuất dựa trên nguyên lý của ông ước tính cứu và ảnh hưởng đến hàng trăm nghìn sinh mạng trong các cuộc xung đột trên khắp thế giới. Đó là sức mạnh của một ý tưởng đơn giản, được chứng minh bằng khoa học và được bảo vệ bởi lòng dũng cảm không chịu nhượng bộ trước thể chế. Đôi khi điều điên rồ nhất bạn có thể làm chính là tin rằng mình đúng khi cả thế giới nói bạn sai.